It's time to start the reading vlog for Case Study by Graeme McRae Burnet. I really want to hear from people who've already read this because I've purposefully not watched reviews for the Booker Prize long list books that I want to read. So if I have decided that they're not books that are interesting to me, I will watch the reviews from other people. But for the ones that I still want to read, and some others that I have on order, I'm not watching the reviews, so I don't know what people are saying about them. So I've read Trust by Hernan Diaz at this point. I've now started Case Study by Graeme McRae Burnet, and hilariously they are very similar in that they are kind of mixed media. So Trust is like 4 different stories in one, but about the same people, and each one unravels a new layer of information about the main couple in it, starting with a novel, then an autobiography, a memoir, and then some diaries. This one, it's split out into the 5 notebooks written by the woman who is like the protagonist, and then interspersed with, so like the first notebook has some pages from a novel by the Collins Braithwaite, like pasted in, and then it looks like the author publishing this book then intersperses his own like historical facts and like known stuff in amongst the notebooks as well. So it's kind of like that same kind of mixed media book within a book type thing. I'm not sure. Is this, what's that called? Narrative memoir or something? Narrative non-fiction? Because it says, in Case Study, Graeme McRae Burnet presents these notebooks interspersed with his own biographical research into Collins Braithwaite. So is this a real person? I'm going to have to do some research before I next update you. I'm going to have to do some research because I don't know. In case, by any chance, you're watching this and you haven't heard anyone else talking about it, here is the synopsis. London, 1965. An unworldly young woman believes that a charismatic psychotherapist, Collins Braithwaite, has driven her sister to suicide. Intent on confirming her suspicions, she assumes a false identity and presents herself to him as a client, recording her experiences in a series of notebooks. But she soon finds herself drawn into a world in which she can no longer be certain of anything, even her own character. I was reading this last night. I was gonna aim to have read a bit more by the time I first updated you. But I'm on page 34 and I have some theories. I personally think it's really obvious, but sometimes they might be red herrings. Some things might be red herrings. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little thing here. I think that looks like a good space just to this side of my head, that says predictions. So if you don't want to hear my predictions, if you're worried about spoilers, in case I'm correct, you can skip past this. As long as you can see that up there, it's a prediction. We've started, and as I say, we're 34 pages in, so we're not very far into the book. So anything that has happened is not going to be a spoiler because it happens very early on. But our woman who's writing the notebooks has gone to see the psychotherapist, Collins Braithwaite. She has read one of his books that's called Untherapy, and she believes that her sister, Dorothy, well, her sister Veronica, but called Dorothy in the books to anonymise it. Sounds convoluted, but it's obvious in this. So in the books by Collins Braithwaite, she's called Dorothy, and this sister believes that Dorothy is Veronica, and that Collins Braithwaite is using Veronica as a case study in this book. The reason she is wanting to investigate Collins Braithwaite is that she believes that Braithwaite led her sister to commit suicide. She leapt off of a bridge or an underpass or something like that, and so she wants to go back. She's created this new identity so that she can go to this therapist without being known as the sister of Veronica. She calls herself Rebecca Smith, but with a Y. Smith with a Y. It's all part of this new identity. Rebecca, because she loved the character in the Daphne du Maurier. Based on the character study done by Braithwaite in his book, you don't know anything about her nature, who she is. You get these glimpses of who she is, but you don't really know who she is. Ooh. Oh, let's just come out and say it, Holly. I think that the sister who is going to see Collins Braithwaite is Veronica or Dorothy. I think we're going to find out it's the same person. I think Rebecca Smith and whatever the name... Do we even know the name of our sort of protagonist? I don't think we do. I don't think we ever find out her name, but I think it's the same person. I think these are all just characters. And I think this thought of where she jumped off the bridge is actually just where she sort of came to stand when she decided she was going to cast off her previous life, you know, Veronica. She wanted to be someone else. She's going to be someone else. I think that's going to be what the thing is. Based on what's happened so far, based on various things about trying to be other people, taking on other personas. So there's my theory. There's my theory. But I had to stop last night because I was like, I need to get this down on a video. I need to sort of put my thoughts out there. And then we can see if I'm right. Okay, we're at page 123. I love it when it lands on 1, 2, 3. What I will give this is, it is very readable. It's consumable. It's really easy to read. So I read a really helpful article on The Guardian, which really helped me understand what is going on. Simply, when I say what is going on, from the fact that it's written as if this is real. So it even says, in case study, Graeme McRae Burnet presents these notebooks interspersed with his own biographical research into Collins Braithwaite. But it's not his own research. It's still all fictional. And that's what I couldn't understand was, is this a real thing? And it's like fiction out of something real. But yeah, the Guardian, and I'll link the Guardian's review of it. Who actually is it? Nina Allen's review of this down below. Basically, they keep referencing McRae Burnet's previous book, which does sound really good, his Bloody Project, which is about a murder in a 19th century Scottish crofting community. I think we're going to have to read that one. That one is also a Booker-nominated book. So I'm sure people all know about it. I don't, but here we go. Okay, so the novel presents itself as the work of one GMB, Graeme McRae Burnet, a writer who has become interested in Collins Braithwaite, an enfant terrible of the 1960s anti-psychiatry movement. After stumbling on Braithwaite's salacious, iconoclastic and compelling collection of case studies on therapy in a Glasgow bookshop, GMB toys with the idea of writing his biography. Although the plan meets with little enthusiasm from his agent and publisher, GMB's fascination with Braithwaite redoubled when he is contacted by a Mr. Martin Gray, offering him 6 notebooks containing the journal of his cousin, whom Gray claims was a patient of Braithwaite. The notebooks contain certain allegations he is sure GMB will find of interest. So that tells me that it is actually all fictional. Interestingly, we then go on in this article to say, those already familiar with Burnet's writing have met GMB before, not only as the writer and researcher who claims distant kinship with the teenage murderer Roddy McRae in his Bloody Project, but also as the translator of Burnet's 2 Raymond Brunette crime novels. The defining essence of Burnet's work to date is to be found in this kind of literary gamesmanship, a brand of metatextuality that is as much about exploiting the possibilities of the novel form as it is about blurring the boundaries between appearance and reality. In throwing us into doubt about which, and more crucially whose story we are supposed to be following, Burnet encourages us to look more closely at the inherent instability of fiction itself. The painstaking, assembled, predominantly mimetic fiction of the 19th century has trained us to trust the author. Burnet has always delighted in undermining such easy assumptions, and in Case Study he ups the stakes still further, providing a veritable layer cake of possible realities to get lost in. That clarifies a few things for me that I was a bit confused about. Yeah, as I say, this is really, really readable. I've already mentioned my thoughts on what is going to turn out to happen, but I do actually like the way that this idea of not knowing who you truly are is being explored through Dorothy/Veronica, the sister who has supposedly killed herself, although we'll see if my predictions come true. Our unnamed narrator, who sometimes calls herself Rebecca Smith, and how so much so that she has like this split personality. There is who she is, and then there is Rebecca Smith. That when she's playing Rebecca Smith in her notebooks, which are basically what we're reading. We're basically reading her notebooks. She switches from first person to third person. So whenever she's being Rebecca, she talks about she does this and she wants this and this is what she is used to doing. And that's really interesting. But then also in the biographical research bit that comes in, so every now and then we have a little bit where it talks about Collins Braithwaite and his life in this biographical bit. And it talks about how he has different personalities and how he's tried to rebel against who his father wanted him to be, who his mother wanted him to be, who his father wanted his mother to be, all these different ways of exploring the idea of not really knowing who you are and who is yourself. Yeah, so that is what is keeping me interested in this book, I think, is how well done that is. Yeah, so see you later. Time for a little update. Time for a little update on case study. I'm at page 178, so I've got about 100, just under 100 pages left of it. And the thing that's really coming out to me now, like this sticking in my head, is that it really reminds me of Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith. This was one of my favourite books from last year, and it's like they consider it a domestic thriller, but it centres two main characters who are deeply unlikable and verging on, is it sociopathic, psychopathic? The one where they don't really have real emotions like other people. I don't know what they're called. But yes, that is the feeling I'm getting from this, because our two main characters are so deeply unlikable, but in the most enjoyable way. Like, I love a book that has unlikable characters. Yes, sometimes that can verge too far into the unlikable, but in this case, it's riveting. And as I say, if you liked this and you haven't read Patricia Highsmith's Deep Water, then I encourage you to read this. I think you'd really like it. I have been noting some little quotes that I just love. This is actually a really funny book. So I loved this bit about when she was first given a diary by her mother. It was an acknowledgement that I had reached the age when I was permitted to have secrets, that I was now old enough to have thoughts I would not wish to share with my family. Of course, this was humbug. I'd been having nasty, malicious thoughts for as long as I could remember, but that little lock granted me licence. Here was a book in which I could record and confine them. It's a curious thing that, as far as I know, boys are not presented with such diaries. Boys are uncomplicated creatures. They swarm around shouting, fighting, or chasing balls, noisily being, while girls sit demurely on the sidelines, nursing our resentment. I love that. Boys have no need for secrets. Everything just pours out of them. Girls are required to keep themselves to themselves. My 10-year-old self was vaguely aware of all this as she opened her new diary on her lap. And I think that is a big theme that goes through this, is the expectations on people and who we're expected to be. That's a really big theme that runs through the whole thing. And then on the next page, there's this really interesting bit. Now, however, I feel differently. It's not that I think my life has assumed greater importance, but with my room safely under lock and key, there is no longer any need to censor myself. If I want to write obscene words or filthy thoughts, I am free to do so. What, after all, is the point of a journal if one is not honest about things? So that's her talking about writing these notebooks in which she's trying to work out why her sister killed herself. And I like this. Writing something down invests it with a kind of significance. But in general, things are of such little consequence, even to those involved, that the act of recording them is no more than vanity. Yeah, I love that idea, this idea that writing in a journal is just vanity. There's so many good bits in this book. I just loved it. Oh, and I loved this. I thought this was really, it gave a real sense of imagery. I just love the imagery in it. Ever since I took up the habit, I have loved smoking more than anything. Smoking is a veil. I adore every aspect of it. The tapping with a gloved finger of the cigarette from the packet, the metallic rasp of the lighter, the pungent whiff of Ronsonol, the first deep inhalation and the blue plume of exhaled smoke, the minor obscenity of lipstick on the filter, the snug pleasure of just holding the thing between index and middle finger. I love to watch women smoke. A woman smoking is never lonely. She is solitary. She is sensual, worldly. Men do not know how to smoke. For men, smoking is a utilitarian business, like using the lavatory or getting on a bus. It is always incidental to another activity, never a thing in itself. Even though I don't smoke and I don't agree with smoking, I love the imagery there. I just love it. Are you going to get bored of me giving you quotes? I don't know. I took another sip. I had to admit that it engendered a relaxing effect. Perhaps, along with taking up smoking, I would set my sights on becoming a raging dipsomaniac. This seemed as worthy an ambition as any other. I just love the comedy in this is just absolutely brilliant. And this bit actually had me laughing out loud. It's so rare that I laugh out loud whilst I'm reading, but this bit, I was sat in bed and my husband had to ask me what it was, so I had to actually read this out loud to him because I thought it was so brilliant. And it's a section in which she's trying to prove the therapist wrong, that she's not so intent on her habits, like she's not so ingrained in them, and she goes, I confess, by a desire to prove Braithwaite wrong. Yesterday at breakfast, for example, I first buttered and then marmaladed my first slice of toast before repeating this process for the second. My normal practice is to butter both sides before applying the marmalade. Father made no comment about this aberrant behaviour, even affecting not to notice it. I just think it's brilliant. As I ate the second slice of toast, the satisfaction I gleaned from defying Braithwaite dissipated. I had succeeded only in getting marmalade in the butter dish, and would have to suffer the admonishing looks of Mrs. Thulin. It is just funny and hilarious, and I think I'm beginning to realise that I love this psychological... I would call both of these sort of psychological thrillers. They are taking a deep look at psychology, I suppose, is psychological thrillers, but in a really riveting and engaging manner. And yeah, this is just full of comedy. I really feel like I'm going to have to read Burnet's previous work. I know I've heard that that's darker. This is a much funnier book, but the overall sort of way that he writes is still there. So yes, this is so good. We finished case study. I can see why there are sort of 3 schools of thought that seem to be appearing about this book. There are those that absolutely flipping love this book from start to finish. They adore it. There are those who love it most of the way through and then are disappointed by the ending. And then there are those who like the notebook section of it and then hate the biographical section of it. So the bit that's about Collins Braithwaite, the psychiatrist, they dislike that bit. I can understand each of those positions. I personally like both aspects. I liked the notebooks and I liked the biographical aspects. I thought they were both interesting. I thought they played off each other really well. I'm in the camp that found the ending not great. It wasn't a bad ending. I can see exactly what the author was trying to do. I can see the parallels that were being drawn, or the themes that were being reflected. I'm not going to talk about the ending because I don't want to ruin it. But I did love what was being done. I just didn't like the way that it was done, if that makes any sense. It just felt very anticlimactic. It was quite obvious. My initial prediction was completely off the mark. We never find out whether our unnamed narrator is her sister as well. She could be, we don't know. It still didn't resolve quite as nicely as I would have liked, to have made this riveting from start to finish. However, I am still tempted to give this a 5-star because so this is a library book. I really want to own it now. This is so good. And I want to go back and reread because I think this could get even more interesting upon reread. So yeah, I think it is actually still a 5-star, even though I found the ending a little bit disappointing. And actually, now that I think of it, there's another book that I gave 5-star and it was one of my favourite books, even though initially I didn't really like the ending because I found the ending a bit not anticlimactic, and that was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. So yeah, even though the ending is anticlimactic, I think this might still be a 5-star. I think something really interesting is that this book has really helped me understand a little bit more about my reading taste, and I've got a couple of books that I wanted to mention that this reminds me of, or that have sort of come to the fore. So this is set in 1960s London. Well, not just London, because there's also sections in the north of England, but yeah, anyway, 1960s Britain, and I'm beginning to realise that I really like 1950s, 60s Britain as a setting for novels, for historical novels. I would never have thought this before, because I didn't really think I liked modern history. I thought I preferred, say, learning about Renaissance period, about the Enlightenment, about, the Dark Ages, but actually that period of transition in Britain is really interesting. And a book that it made me think of is On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. This was one of my favourite books from last year. This is set in, 1960s. I couldn't remember if it was 50s or 60s. It's 1960s Britain again. What they both show is the changeover from, or like the competing ideals of traditional values and how society has been up to that point, and then the more liberal way of thinking that's coming about, this new idea of the teenager and how we can be more sexually free and how we, women's place in the world is changing, because much of the reason that the female protagonist in this, the unnamed narrator, is so unlikable is because in one of her selves, which I'll come on to the selves in a minute, one of her selves is very sort of anti-feminist, and she's like, that self is extolling these traditional values and women's place in the world, and then the self that she wants to become, Rebecca Smith, the one that she's acting, as she says at the beginning, she says she's acting this part, is much more free and wants to be out there and is much more feminist, really. And so that sort of butting heads of those two societal things is something that I'm coming to realise I really love in literature. And so if you like that as well, and you haven't read On Chesil Beach, try it, because those similar themes come up in this. The other one that I've just started reading from my library is Frankissstein by Jeanette Winterson. So this begins with Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein. So that's the bit that I've read. I'm not very far in. I am page 30. So the very first section, like the first chapter or whatever you might call it, is Mary Shelley having discussions and getting inspired to write Frankenstein and the sorts of conversations that were going on. I mean, I'll talk about it more. I'm going to do a dedicated reading blog for it, but I'll talk about that more in a minute in another video. But the bit that I've just read that made me think, oh, how funny that to be reading this straight after case study, is that the second section, the bit that we move to next, is about Rye, a young transgender doctor who's just arrived at a robotics and AI convention in Memphis. Memphis is a city that was established the year after Frankenstein was published, so they're drawing the parallels there. But he starts to think about how there's not enough time in life to do everything that one wants to do. And then here he says, my mind idled around the difference between desire for life without end and desire for more than one life, that is, more than one life but lived simultaneously. I could be me, and me too. If I could make copies of myself, upload my mind and 3D print my body, then one Rye could be in Graceland, another Rye at the shrine of Martin Luther King, a third Rye busking the blues in Beale Street. Later, all my selves could meet to share the day and reassemble into the original self I like to believe is me. And that idea of having multiple selves and who you think you are is a very similar theme. So how funny to be picking this up straight afterwards. As I say, I'm going to do a reading vlog for this because I'm only on page 30. I'm really enjoying this. I do love Jeanette Winterson though. So back to case study though, because that's the book that we're talking about today. So I think I mentioned previously that I quite like an unlikable character, and this contains unlikable characters, but I wanted to clarify that because this is a book about mental illness, and the characters both, there's some suggestion that they could both be schizophrenic. It's very obvious that they both have some sort of personality disorder. Whilst they are both unlikable characters, I don't mean that because they have mental illness. I mean that because of how that manifests and the sorts of things that they say and do. So, for instance, the female protagonist, the unnamed narrator, she is very racist. She's not racist against people of colour necessarily, maybe a little bit, but not overtly in the book. But what she does do is she's very critical of the lady who lives with Mrs. Thulin, who's Welsh, and there's a comment in there about how Mrs. Thulin should be trying harder to pronounce words the British way and not with her Welsh accent, which, is still racism. It's funny for the character, but it does make her unlikable. And that's what I mean. Like, there are these things where she's very critical about women who are sexually liberal and, just all these comments that she makes. She is very unlikable, but you have to remember that she does have a mental illness, clearly, from this. Like, it's all about schizophrenia and personality disorders. So I do say they are unlikable characters, but they're interesting, unlikable characters, and you become very involved. So, yeah, I hope that comes across right. But anyway, I mean, I've only read 2 books from the long list so far, and we're very soon. I mean, what are we? A week away from the shortlist announcement, so I may get one more read. I may get After Sappho read, but I'm not I'm not going to be very close to this. But I think that this and trust, whilst the themes of the book are very different, trust is all about money and about the lives of rich people, and this is more about mental illness and schizophrenia, and they both have this underlying thing of can we trust the author? So in Trust by Hernan Diaz is about, can we trust the author of the novel? Can we trust the author of the autobiography? And then we start to get more of an in-depth look at who is in those stories from the memoir and then the diaries. Whereas this is, can we trust these characters who both clearly have personality disorders? I mean, up to this point, I've been utterly convinced that trust would edge this out on the shortlist. I feel like trust is going to be there. However, the more days that go past, so it's been 3 days, I think, now that I'm actually managing to sit down and film this. It's been about 3 days, I think, since I finished this. I'm now not sure. Maybe this one, because it's really good. I don't know. I think I'm going to go with my gut and say trust would edge this one out. And the only reason they wouldn't both be there is because the long list does appear to be really diverse in terms of the writing. So I don't think they'd both be on there. I think it will be one or the other. And I think it'll be trust. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this. I hope you liked the book recommendations that have come to me from this. But, yeah. See you soon.